broadcasting live from ViVE 2023 in Nashville. I want to thank first CHIME and DHI for inviting us to their theater. I'm your host, Justin Barnes. We have a terrific show this morning focused on data governance and strategy. As many of you know, data governance plays a huge role in healthcare because data itself is everywhere within the walls of every healthcare system. From clinical images to metadata to text, healthcare data is abundant. Join us today as we sit down to discuss how the practice of data governance management can positively impact clinical care, as well as how it relates to automation and AI, cybersecurity, and enterprise imaging. My first guest, Mari Savickis, or better known as just Mari, Vice President of Public Policy for CHIME. So welcome, Mari, to the show.
We'll accept standards, but they have to be coupled with some help. And so, whether or not Senator Warner is able to push forward, say, whether it will be grants, will it be a cyber incentive program, will it be ideally, in my fantasy world, because I live there sometimes, will it be, built into Medicare reimbursement? That's the real long tail of this. That's what I think he's looking at. Other things too, like workforce. I mean, it's not just money. It's like, how do you shore up the workforce? Who's going to be doing this work? We already have a shortage, so we're really starting from behind. I mean, these are just some of the things. We could go on and on, but 20 pages is a lot to cover.
So where would somebody start if they want to engage and learn, but also let their voice be heard? Do they inside a CHIME? What can they join or participate or work group to join or something like that?
So, all right. Health Sector Coordinating Council. Come see us. You can email me and my colleagues at policy@chimecentral.org. Member or not, come find us. We will point you in the right direction. It's Greg's group, okay? You start there. There's many work streams. And inside of this, they have deliverables. And these are jointly developed products with the government, okay? With HHS, our partner, it is a shared responsibility, and the industry. So, for example, wait for it, everyone. I'm going to use an acronym. Wait for it. HICCUP, okay? I didn't name it. All you need to do is HICCUP, and you just Google 405D. It's such a sexy name. It's named for a part of statute. We don't have to get into it, but it's a set of cybersecurity best practices. And you know what? They're not mandatory yet, but it's coming. The standards and the mandates will be coming, and hopefully they'll be coupled with some resources from the federal government. Like another thing we asked for, and this was a GAO recommendation, was, hey, should we have like a backstop for cyber insurance? Check, we should have that too.
Absolutely.
So you got crop insurance, flood insurance. Yep. We need some cyber insurance because some of our members are uninsurable, especially if you've suffered a cyber attack. So these are the kinds of things that when you come into our umbrella, the umbrella of the sector, you can join these work streams. You can get access. The products anyone can get them. They're free. So HICCUP is one of them. Greg asked me to mention that they're going to put out a clinical series of vignettes. That's coming out this week. HICCUP 2.0 being updated. It's getting a little facelift. Just like 2 weeks ago, HHS, in conjunction with the sector, put out an implementation guide. It's like 82 pages. Get some coffee, sit down, snuggle up with that, and get reading. I mean, so again, don't eat the whole elephant all at once. Yep.
No, obviously that has been a huge piece of my career, is engaging these work groups, learning from my peers, and making a difference. Going to Capitol Hill, letting our voice be heard, helping guide policy. So phenomenal. We have about 2 or 3 more minutes. What do you hope to get out of the next few days here at ViVE?
Well, I mean, I'm a consummate networker, raging extrovert, so I'll be probably talking to
raging
everyone.
Raging extrovert.
Just, seeing people in person, it's nice. It's nice to see you. I haven't seen you in 20 years. Yeah. How are you doing, Justin? You doing okay? Okay, great.
Phenomenal, actually.
Okay, tell me one thing about yourself that's not work-related.
Oh, gosh. Not work-related?
We're going to diverse off the script for a second.
No, I just have enjoying life to the fullest every single day, to be honest. Just kind of enjoying myself. I love this sector, but also about 6-7 years ago, I decided to take a little bit of time off, enjoy myself, and work with friends. So I got some great people, here actually at ViVE now that I'll sync up with. But really, when I went back to work, just took some time off, went back to work, and work with people that I like and love. So that's what life is all about.
It's really nice to take off that time, because you know what? What's that expression about?
Life is short.
Well, life is short, and on your tombstone, they'll never say he or she worked so hard.
Exactly.
So good for you. What else can I tell you about? I mean, CHIME is here. Come find us. Policy@chimecentral.org. We will answer all your questions. Doors always open, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Well, engage in learning. Engage CHIME Central.
And volunteer for your sector. We need your help, okay? We will help you. We will be your champions in Washington. But you got to help us show up and volunteer, and signing up and joining the sector is free.
Oh, and volunteering means you're going to learn a lot. You're going to meet new peers. You're going to meet, get educated yourself, help lead your company, help lead your sector, your industry, let your voice be heard. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and you're going to hear from some of these folks who are on it too. So I'm sure they're going to take it much further than I took it. How are we doing on time? Good?
Cool. We're
All
good.
right.
We're good.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mari. Bye. Welcome back to the show, gentlemen. Welcome to the stage, Tim Dawson, Chief Technology Officer, Canon Medical, and Drex DeFord, Healthcare Strategist and CIO at CrowdStrike. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you here today.
Mari's a hard act to follow.
She is a hard act to follow, for sure. We're going to do a quick mic check here, make sure everybody's a little closer.
All right.
Perfect.
All right, how's that?
Excellent.
Good?
Good?
Perfect.
All right.
All right.
So, first of all, when did you guys get in town?
I came in Saturday night, late.
Okay.
And so yesterday was really my first full day.
Is it good?
Yeah.
I came in yesterday morning, and I was lucky enough to take the first flight in because all of my colleagues were ensnared in travel challenges all over the U.S.
Heard. Yeah, I actually got in on Wednesday to just make sure I was here, but also prepared and prepped and all that kind of good stuff. So I've been enjoying Nashville. I love Nashville, by the way.
Yeah.
We can just focus on that for a little bit. Great city. Great to have you guys here today. So, first of all, question, why should a CIO today have data governance as a key component of their cybersecurity and their cyber strategy? I mean, we just talked a little bit with Mari, got a little bit of lay of the land, but what are your thoughts?
Well, one thing I would say is you could ask that question either way, right? You could say, why should you have cybersecurity as part of your data governance, or why should you have data governance as part of your cybersecurity?
Yep.
Because fundamentally, you have to know what data you have and how to secure it, and the two of them go hand in hand.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's know what you have. You can't protect it if you don't know what you have, where it is, what you're doing with it. I think it's also really interesting that we kind of have a strange situation now that has sort of occurred over the past few years, and that is the crown jewels of your data may not be where you think they are. We think about them being in electronic health records or other tools like that, but we have frontline workers and analysts who are really good at pulling data out of those systems and putting them in other systems and turning them into stuff they can use to improve their operations. So the crown jewels might not be where they're at. And then we use a lot of third-party stuff too, not only applications, but we have outside non-employees who move forward and actually do work inside the health system. So knowing who has access to that data and where it is, it's just critically important if you're going to secure it.
Well, and Mari, our first guest here today, talked about 86% of facilities don't have proper governance strategies. I mean, that's just amazing in protections.
Yeah, I think
86%.
Sorry.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And she sort of called it out, like that's just the baseline. That's just you've done a risk assessment. That doesn't mean that you've done anything about it yet, just that you've done an effective risk assessment. It's a big hole.
Yeah.
Right. When you think about why it matters that it be secure. Right? So when I think about cybersecurity, I always go back to the CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And there are different reasons why each of those are important, but the last two kind of come down to patient safety, right? Of course, we don't want anybody stealing our data,
right?
But what matters more to me is that the healthcare system be able to operate. And I once heard a CIO tell me there is not enough paper in the world to run our operations if all of the systems are down.
Right.
And I mean, that was a really powerful way to think about it. And you need to make sure that the systems are up.
Yep.
And so the other thing you have to think about is the fact that as Mari said, the attackers are out there all the time.
Right.
You will be hacked, and the question is, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to go after and be able to recover operations?
Nope, very true. So what are one or two or three key strategies for keeping data secure?
Let me tie back to what he just said. I think this idea of certainly doing the risk assessment and understanding where all of this stuff is important. We see sort of a transition happening now in healthcare cybersecurity, this transformation from, you hear cyber pros talk about it as taller castle walls and deeper, wider moats. Our goal in cybersecurity for years and years and years has been keep the bad guy out. Don't let them into the network. But I think that's kind of changed over time. You still have to do that, but in the spirit of resiliency and being able to stay up and running to do the mission, this idea of speed has become very important. The bad guys are obviously getting over the castle walls and across the moats and inside the network. So the goal becomes, how do you find the bad guys and kill them fast and not create any kind of disruption to business, clinical, or research operations? And if you can do that 24/7, 365, you have successfully built a program that not only keeps many bad guys out, but helps you find and kill the bad guys who get inside the network very, very quickly, which doesn't cause disruptions, which goes to that resilience point you were making earlier.
Yeah. Well, I'm always reminded of the chaos monkey, that we've heard about, that, that some of these systems have done to manage resiliency. And if you think about how could you apply that to our systems to make sure that we keep the bad guys out? If you're constantly tearing the systems apart and redeploying them from scratch, they've got nowhere to hide. If they manage to get to breach into a single server and they start sort of building their backdoors from there, and then the next day that server is gone because you've recreated a new virtual server in its place, they've got nowhere to go, right? And so that's, I think, some of the things that you need to think about as we're developing systems and deploying them going forward is how to make sure that happens, whether it be on premises or in the cloud.
One of the things too, I think, when you talk about what are the few things that you need to do to make sure that you have a better program, the communication part of it can't be overstated. Helping clinicians and researchers and your business operations teams understand what you're doing in cybersecurity and why it's important. And not that I'm doing cybersecurity because I'm trying to make your life miserable, but I'm doing cybersecurity because I really want to make sure that our operations can continue to run and we can keep taking care of patients and families. And that requires a lot of special care and attention in those communications, going to the staff meetings and doing all the stuff you need to do to make sure that you're hearing what they're telling you so you can understand what you may be breaking or what problems you might be causing in cybersecurity, but helping them understand why you're doing the things that you're doing to protect them and to protect their patients. Yeah.
Excellent. So what's a starting point? I mean, what's the best practice? I like to, my show focuses a lot on best practices and key strategies. It can be somewhat overwhelming if you think about, oh my gosh, my data governance strategy, but what's a starting point for a CIO? If you're new, even if you're a new CIO or, decided, I'm going to take this seriously or we're going to take it to another level, where's a starting point for the average CIO?
Well, again, data governance is a great place to start. Like, understand where your data is and then understand what systems are that operate on it and then who has access to those. You have to have that baseline understanding of what's going on in your organization to be able to do that. And we're in medical imaging, so our background is making sure that the access to those images, is unassailable, right? That they can always get those when they need them, and that really kind of depends not just on any one particular operation or application. It's the whole system. It's the connectivity from end to end with that, and you have to have a plan.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, data governance is very, very difficult. And often the information that we need to be able to make decisions, we have to pull from multiple systems. And so, again, if you don't have a great track of where the data is, how sensitive it is, and how important it is to the operation, it's hard to make good decisions about how much cybersecurity, how much effort I should put against protecting that particular asset or those sets of assets. And when you don't have that information, your tendency then is to say, I have to protect everything at the highest level possible, which is probably the most expensive version of what you're going to create when you're trying to do cybersecurity in the effort to protect the data.
Right. And you have to also manage and eliminate the duplication of data, right? So if you're worried about data being stolen, having lots of copies of it or copies of it in drawers and things like that, depending on the kind of imaging, for example, that you do with visible light imaging, is very often not well managed. And actually keeping that stuff confidential can be really challenging if you've got it all over the place. So centralizing it is generally seen as a good idea. Centralize that and then provide broad access to that. The flip side, though, is if you centralize everything, now you've got one giant thing that is a really enticing target, right? So you need to make sure that that's secure, and it's secure in a way that can't be easily overwritten, that you've got tight controls on it, or again, maybe there are ways to federate that data and to make sure that but it's done in a consistent way so that you can manage that and that you can provide the right access.
So kind of building on that, and Drex, what you brought up before, how do you balance the needs of cybersecurity with clinical needs such as performance and accessibility?
Yeah, I mean, that is also a very, very tough job for cyber pros and for CIOs. I kind of go back to the communication piece, right? You have to have the conversations regularly with clinical business and research operations staff, helping them understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's tough because, look, I mean, I can tell you just from experience, I've been a CIO for 30 years, when you go into the clinical staff meeting and do a presentation about information services and you talk about cybersecurity, you're going to get a lot of pushback from those folks.
Absolutely.
But don't let that be the reason that you don't go to those meetings. They really appreciate it when you're there. They will tell you after the fact, we're really glad you showed up. Took a lot of guts to come and sit in front of all of us and sort of have this conversation with us. We know you're listening because we see you then go back and make some changes that really help. And then you tell us about the changes that you made and the effect that they had. But it's also good for them. And what will happen sometimes in those groups too is that you'll wind up with a sort of an evangelist that comes out of that group. You give them good cybersecurity messages, you help them understand why it is that you're doing what you're doing, and you'll be walking down the hallway and you'll hear one clinician talking to another clinician like weirdly about some cybersecurity thing. And so it's a team sport in so many ways, cybersecurity, and certainly that extends to the communication part of your staff, helping them understand what you're doing and why, and understanding the impact that's having on their ability to operate well.
Yeah, so that's critical is helping people understand why. Start with why, right? And then the flip side is also to listen to them and understand what their challenges are with what you're rolling out, and to come up with new ways, right? So this morning on the main stage they were talking about how technology is a source of great innovation, but it can also be a challenge. But then you flip that around and the innovation can then address the challenges that we've inadvertently created. And so having the conversations about which part of this is difficult, how can we deal with that? There are other challenges too that where you can kind of take a different approach, where break the glass type of needs, things like that. There are certain situations where for medical necessity, all of the restrictions we put in place are just going to eventually kill somebody if you don't get them out of the way. So you need to have mechanisms to do that in an audited way such that you can ask questions later about why did this happen. But ultimately, you need to be able to unblock that so that critical patient care happens and then the standard access controls are restored.
When you have those interesting break the glass situations too, those are real opportunities to learn about why did we have to break the glass? What are we not doing in our normal operations process that created this urgent situation that we had to sort of violate all of our policies? And if you learn from that, if you make your processes better, and sometimes it's just training and sometimes it's the technology, but if you learn from it, it makes a big difference in the balance of the challenge between how do I get my work done with all this cybersecurity stuff you're giving me?
Right.
Is there a best practice or an idea that we can give the audience? I mean, do you schedule these meetings proactively, these sessions with providers and clinicians? And how is there a thought like do it quarterly, semi-annually, annually? What's your cadence? You talk about communication and the importance of it.
Yeah, I think that if you're doing it, so for me, when I was in the CIO seat, I tried to fit into meetings that were already going to happen with the surgical team or the CFO's team, whatever the case may be. I would just show up to those, be a part of those, be an agenda item, listen. Sometimes they would give me a pretty good chunk of the meeting. Sometimes they would give you the whole meeting because they just thought it was amazing that somebody else from the organization wanted to come and talk to them.
That's excellent.
And so, I think the rhythm is something that you decide in your own organization. What feels right, what feels like enough and not too much, because also then there's the other challenge of kind of being too over broadcasted. Right. It's that would be my recommendation. Just try to fit into the meetings that are already there. I think you'll be welcome if you ask about coming.
That's great advice.
That's a great point. And then as a vendor working with providers, right, when we come in and they're going to do an upgrade or they're going to move to a new version of our software, that is a great time to have that conversation about cybersecurity practices and where are we with things and what new capabilities can we roll out, and understanding strategically where's the provider going with their cybersecurity strategy and how can we help with that. That's a critical piece of that.
I love to hear that. I mean, honestly, it is third-party risk and the challenges that we have with products that come into the healthcare environment that aren't secure out of the box or weren't built with security in mind, that we have to try to figure out how to retrofit. medical devices in particular, come to mind. Those are such hard challenges for healthcare organizations because they can't do what they would normally do to those devices because they void warranties and cause other problems. They're really important to the delivery of healthcare, so you can't really just say no. You have to figure out a way to kind of bridge that gap. And so coming in out of the gate, like you guys do, talking about cybersecurity, here's how we're secured. We want to make sure we fit in your model is incredibly important.
It's fantastic. So, closing question, about 5 minutes left. As data volumes continue to explode, how will data governance and cybersecurity evolve?
Yeah, so one thing that I think about that, again, medical imaging, the data volumes are huge. It used to be, we went from megabytes to gigabytes to terabytes to petabytes, and so customers managing many terabytes or petabytes of data have a lot of challenges. You can't simply back that up to tape and restore it if you get corrupted, right? You don't have the years it would require to bring all of your systems back online if you do that sort of thing. So there are storage technologies that can be brought to bear. There are ways of making sure that your data is structured in a way that's not proprietary, in a way that could be easily understood and reconstituted. Those sort of approaches are absolutely critical. Utilizing storage technologies instead of just having a direct access drive, but storing using object storage. Protocols like S3, which don't have to go into Amazon S3, but can also just apply to a local storage device. If you use those are encrypted and managed by certificates, such that even if the hacker gets on the system, they don't have access to that data. And so, there are strategies for that, and then you can make those things write once and not overridable except for during certain scenarios. So there are a lot of strategies like that you can bring to bear to make sure that the data is, you manage the integrity and availability of that, and then you come back around with the confidentiality.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it's, from the cloud perspective, just with volumes going up, with more data than ever before, the way that we're leveraging it, the cloud is the future. We run a lot of stuff in our data center today, but the cloud is really where we're going. More processing power. And it also creates the situation where, in my experience, we buy a bunch of hardware and then we don't buy hardware for a couple of years, and then we buy a bunch of more hardware a couple of years later, and that sine wave drives CFOs crazy. So while the cloud may not be cheaper, it may be in some cases, one of the things that really comes with it is the benefit of being able to predict the cost because of the work that you're doing. And as new workload comes on, you can predict that cost. CFOs love that because they can start to see what things are going to cost in the future. And in all of that, obviously cloud security is incredibly important. Absolutely. And we see a lot of misconfigurations of clouds and other things that cause those clouds to be breached. So back to the fundamentals, even in the cloud, a lot of fundamental work needs to be done just to protect that data.
That's excellent. So we've got about 2 minutes or so left. What do you guys hope to achieve the next couple of days here at ViVE?
I love coming here and talking to people, face to face, and I've already mentioned that earlier. Meeting with prospective customers, meeting with existing customers, just meeting with other people like Drex that I love talking to and learning things from. It's fantastic.
Love it.
It's been fun so far, and I think the next few days are going to be great. I'm a past CHIME chair. I have so many friends that are here. And so for me, it's just coming and seeing people, especially after the pandemic. There are still people who are like, this may be their first real trip out.
Right.
And so seeing people live and in person and being able to give them a hug, it's awesome. I love it.
Totally agree. Excellent. Tim, Drex, thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
For the show. Thank you very much. Have a great conference. Oh, thank you, gentlemen.
Great. Nicely done.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Nicely done.
Welcome back. Welcome to the stage. Thank you very much for joining me today. So I have Jeff Hendrikse, Vice President, Enterprise Imaging from Canon Medical, Randi Gibbs, Solution Architect, Canon Medical, and Kim Garriott, Chief Innovation Officer, Global Healthcare and Life Sciences NetApp. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So first of all, when did you guys get in town?
I arrived yesterday around lunchtime. So
Excellent.
Yep, last night.
Last night?
Yep.
Same last night.
Cool. And what do you guys hope to achieve over the next couple of days here?
Well, for me, I just want to look around. This show is centered on innovation. It's always nice to see new things.
Absolutely
Yeah,
agree.
exactly. Just want to make some new relationships and see what the latest innovation trends are out there and have some fun.
Take in Nashville.
Yeah, take in Nashville, see what the trends are going and kind of what the new buzzwords are out there this
You got
year.
it. Love it. Yeah, no, it's always this is my I guess my second ViVE. It's a great show, and obviously the hosts are phenomenal as well. So let's keep on going with data governance. So what is the importance of data governance to enterprise imaging? Who wants to start? Jeff,
Well, maybe we should start with the definition of enterprise imaging.
please.
Hey, let's talk about that for a minute. So, enterprise imaging was, well, it's been around quite a while, but let's talk about the definition. A work group between HIMSS and SIM, the Society of Imaging Informatics and Medicine, came up with a definition of enterprise imaging, and it's about the strategies. I'm going to get this right. Hey, Kim was on the group that defined it. Hopefully I get this right. So it's the strategies, the policies, and the workflows around how we, across the healthcare enterprise, capture, use, view, share, exchange, analyze your data, your imaging data, again, across all the different imaging specialties, in a way that complements all the rest of the patient data in the EMR. So that's what enterprise imaging is all about. So if you think about that definition, it's just rife with data governance issues, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and one of the core tenets of enterprise imaging and really, how we brought this together in the early days, dates back to 2013. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary of enterprise imaging this year. And data governance serves as the foundation because it's about making imaging and all multimedia content available across the care continuum, and without proper data governance, there's just no way that interoperability is going to be there.
It's excellent.
Yeah, my background is long-time clinical. So from the clinical aspect, really just making sure that the data integrity is withheld under data governance, making sure that that data works for the patient and the physician as they move through their clinical experience.
It's excellent. So how do you see the workflows within enterprise solution being of importance?
Yeah, they're very important. We always like to say one workflow does not fit all, right? So careful consideration has to be given to each use case, to each specialty that is generating or producing imaging as well as consuming imaging. And to be able to ensure data relevance, we really have to, look at where that data is first acquired, and that's in the workflow, and how it's acquired, how it's labeled, and the factors assigned to it during that acquisition really sets the tone for the value of that data and the relevancy it's going to have as you present it in the EMR. So it's the workflow is where it starts.
Excellent.
And maybe just to drill in a little bit further on that level. A lot of this started in radiology, where you have industry standards, DICOM. DICOM is super helpful in terms of connecting the devices, but also super helpful in terms of the way we can capture the patient metadata, all the patient data. Lots of customers think that when you move into enterprise imaging, these problems are solved in the same way, and that's really not true, is it, Kim?
Right,
There
no.
are so many different ways that we can capture the data. Think about let's say a dermatologist capturing some photos of a skin lesion on a patient's arm. How do those photos get put into an enterprise imaging system? How do they get associated with the patient metadata? So really, as Kim was saying, when you think about enterprise imaging, there's just a wide variety of different workflows and different modality types, different things that you need to think about as you piece together your entire portfolio. Because in the end, what you want is a cohesive data set associated with the patient.
Yeah, because in radiology, we are fortunate that we have a radiology information system, or lab, that we have a lab information system, but we don't have a wound care. We do have a wound care management system, but it's not integrated usually with other systems to receive orders or encounters. So it's very different when you move outside of the traditional imaging areas like cardiology and radiology.
When you standardize those workflows as well, it really sets you up so that when you get to the point where you start using analytics and AI, you have the standard data, because when you acquired the data, you used a workflow that was across the board. So your data actually means something.
Right.
Yeah, Randy, I think that's a super important point, isn't it? It's lots of times you can address a workflow, but there's another layer to it. It's almost like the strategic element of the data, right? We want to be able to solve this workflow, but we want to solve it in a way where the data is captured. It's captured in a neutral kind of way, a way that makes the data more strategic for future uses, whether that's applied towards AI, whether that's applied to population health or things that we don't even know about yet. We want to make sure we're capturing that data strategically, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
And regarding, I guess, AI and machine learning, how does data governance need to kind of evolve, keeping those things in mind?
Greatly.
That's right.
I was going to say also.
Profound.
Standardizing.
Yep.
Standardizing it so that your data is correct. Because when you turn AI on or you start using data for analytics, you really want to make sure that the data that you acquired is working for you. That it doesn't have, a lot of times in healthcare, I don't know how it always happens, but you get these anonymized fields.
Mm-hmm.
Even in regular patient studies or imaging,
Yep.
and those fields throw everything off.
So standardization. Yep.
Yeah,
Sure.
the standardization is key, and it's often an area that's overlooked. We don't think about when we bring together different types of imaging and multimedia that they do need to complement each other, and it does need to have a reflection of standardization, right? A head is a head, not
Yep.
a head and a brain and a skull, to really drive that. And we've recognized that, especially in workflows like digital photography and digital pathology. But in digital photography, we hadn't really thought about superficial anatomy. Radiology, really, we've got internal anatomy down. But it's what is the right balance of naming nomenclatures for, what a dermatologist wants to see versus what 99% of all the other, clinicians want to see. So we're trying to tackle this at a society and an academic level where we're starting small with body part, right? So what will we call, and this was driven by digital pathology workflows, what will we call and agree on the standard anatomy? So SIM and HIMSS is working together to create a consortium to drive adoption of an existing standard, not the creation of a new one. We have plenty of standards, but let's adopt. We've had them for a long time, SNOMED CT, LOINC, but yet we're not unified in how we use those standards. So it has a long way to go, and it has a lot of ramifications as organizations, just start to capture images without really stepping back to think about the importance of the data that's being captured along with that image.
Excellent. So you mentioned SIM and HIMSS. Are there work groups, or what are the groups helping? Is there specific? I do a lot of work group work. So, is there something in there that can engage or learn?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we founded the HIMSS SIM Enterprise Imaging Community in 2014. Now we have over 700 members.
Excellent.
And it is a work group within that community that is moving forward and sponsoring the good work that we're going to bring forward here. You'll hear a little bit more about it at HIMSS and then a little bit more at SIM, but we're ready to really get going on it.
Terrific. So what are top 3 things that we should have in place before we start the adoption of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the analytics to ensure a smoother or smoothest adoption and transition?
For me, it's about the elements of trust and how this is working from the workflow. A lot of discussion in the industry about things like drift, and I don't necessarily want to get into that technology, but I was reminded of a story. A radiologist, Dr. Raymond Geis, was describing at a trade show a couple of years ago. He talked about a situation in which a new CT scanner was implemented. It was a dual energy CT scanner. And months later, they started to understand that the priority assigned by the AI engine in the workflow engine was taking all of those scans and putting them at the very top. And they didn't really notice that at first. But it was because the dual energy CT scanner was triggering something in the AI algorithm that caused this problem. So there are things that we need to pay attention to in AI as we start to trust the machine. We need to make sure we have those governance processes in place to say, okay, is this working the way we intend it to? Is the outcome what we're expecting? Are these the right things that we should be doing? So for me, it's making sure that in advance of thinking about the adoption of AI, you've already started to think about what's that feedback loop. How do I know that it's working within the right parameters?
I think that's a great point. Also, I think organizations need to determine, will they be the recipient of AI algos, or will they participate in the development and the training? Will they contribute data in an anonymized way to be able to ensure the greatest levels of data diversity? So I think that those are really just important governance factors to look at, deciding, if you do want to participate in the development of models or the training of models, what use cases are you going to go after first, and what are going to offer the most value back to your organization? So I think really understanding how your role should be in that, and then also what is most important in your clinical practice and the use cases that you should prioritize, because there's a whole world and hundreds of vendors chasing tiny little algorithm development, right? So what's important to you and your organization?
Excellent.
Really training the staff, the clinical staff, to assure, again, that data integrity. So making sure that the acquisition of the data is solid, that when you go to deploy these AI analytics, that your integrations work with those applications, making sure you're getting good data.
Yep.
A lot of the clinical staff, when you start talking about some of this, they say, oh, it's so technical. Oh, it's not. You've just never been shown the other half of the picture.
Yeah.
That's
I think,
excellent.
being prepared for the adoption as well, right? I think you both alluded to, just the trust that's going to be needed for clinicians to feel comfortable in this AI-assisted workflow.
Yes.
So to not overlook that human element and that adoption that has to, be cared for, and only through really showing that trust between the data and the humans is that, really going to get the level of adoption needed.
No, you're spot on. Actually, John Holomka was my guest a couple weeks ago, and he actually brought up that specific point in a lot of his AI research and machine learning. So very cool. In a recent interview, actually a good friend of the show, Anish Chopra, first CTO of the U.S., said he believes data governance is probably the biggest gap from best performing organizations to the least performing organizations. So what are the positive financial impacts, positive and negative, introduced by the pursuit of improved data governance?
I think Randi has a really great example for that.
Yeah, so what I see in day-to-day is poor data integrity. So, patient comes into the ER with a headache, and they were across the clinic, at a clinic, earlier in the day they had a head CT, but, when the hospital goes to query that other database, they're querying what their label is, which is CT brain, right? So it doesn't pick the head up. And then, you repeat that study, and then all of this sudden, you send the bill out, and you were the last man in, so you're not getting paid.
Right.
That's one of the biggest financial impacts that I see in healthcare. Not only that, but we're repeating a study with radiation, so there's some health effects to that as well. But financially, it can be a really big hit if you don't have solid data integrity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that, we'll use that digital photography example again, right? And the naming of those photos, and actually just the ingestion of those photos into a centralized system that will make viewing available by all the members on the care team will help to avoid, in a wound care situation, a patient is discharged, they're sent home, the home health provider comes out, they see, a pretty nasty looking wound. Without the visual reference of that actual photo, we only have to go by the subjective text. And so many times patients are transported to an ED because the home health provider thinks that the wound has actually gotten worse when it's actually gotten better. And that's an inconvenience on the patient. It's undue stress on the healthcare system, and who pays for that? So I think that's very important in that realm as well. And I've got a couple others, but I think you've got one.
Lots of things right on the tip of the tongue, isn't there? One of the other things, and I was thinking about your questions with Drex and Tim just moments ago. They talked a little bit about data explosion.
Yes.
I think one of the real areas of data governance that we need to talk about a little bit more is how long are we going to keep the data available for our patients? Right, there's an explosion of data. Already some of the data sets are enormous.
Yes.
Lots of institutions are dabbling in digital pathology where the study sizes are even bigger. Are we actually going to keep all of this data for all time as we're currently doing? And I think we need to have better governance around that, and I think that drives cost directly. Right?
Absolutely.
If we eliminate a whole bunch of this storage, we start to free up cost in the system again. So again, I think that's a really important topic that we need to bring to the center.
Yeah, and maybe the conversation isn't around the deletion of data, because we know that has great value, but there's a very important conversation that has to go on between IT and the clinical community to ensure that data can be tiered appropriately as it ages. So it's always available, maybe just not available in that millisecond retrieval time. But there's a huge cost opportunity to be able to look at doing that in a more reasonable way, and organizations are really missing out on a very important cost factor. And to the point of digital pathology, right, we're seeing single images in digital pathology that are, on average 1.5 to 3 gigabytes. But there are images being generated that are 200 gigabytes just per a single image.
Wow.
And there are research organizations that are going to want to retain those. So you can't continue to keep those on, solid state disks. You need to be able to move them to slower storage.
Agreed.
Are there any best practices there on timing? And I mean, share with my audience. I'd love to, what are your thoughts there on timing or storage, or how long you keep some of these articles? And
I haven't seen any yet. In our customer base, the objects are stored forever. There is some discussion about whether we should tier them or whether we should compress them or delete them. But in the end, in our customer base, no.
Yeah.
Do you see that too?
Yeah, so it really varies by organization and what their tolerance is. I think standardly, many organizations want to keep the last 3 years of exams on the fastest retrieval. But certainly there are studies that we know that we could even promote, past that. These chest x-rays that are performed every day on an inpatient, unless there's a complication, not every chest x-ray needs to be staved. But we also have to look again at how we're labeling the data, because state board of health regulations have different retention regulations depending on the type of study that it is. If it's a mammography study, it needs to be retained 30 years past the date of the exam. OSHA studies have to be kept for the life of the patient. Can we identify a mammo study and keep it safe? Yes. Can we identify an OSHA study? No. So how do you, really label your data, again, at the point of ingestion during workflow, so you have the most data to work against and be able to sort and filter through?
Excellent. That's good advice. Randi?
I'd really like to see regulation brought up to standards that are more fluent with digital versus film. I don't know that they've ever really updated those since we've been on film. Back in the day, we stood in the film library and we manually purged films. So it would be nice to see some updated regulation that supports more of the digital workflows.
That's great. So my show focuses a lot on best practices. So kind of in closing, what advice would you offer audience here, everybody listening, just from your perspective and your and how you see this data governance and strategy?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to the concept of data neutrality. I really, truly believe that we don't yet know all of the different uses of data. And so making sure that data is coded in a standard way, making sure that data is accessible, whether that's to a human user or whether that's to dozens of AI machines that are going to be running overnight on the data, making sure that the data is in a format that's accessible and usable at all times is really core for me, and something that I would recommend to our listeners.
I think take the time to be thoughtful. We all are trying to race, and organizations have precious few resources, but it's kind of that work smarter, not harder. So take the time to develop a data governance strategy to understand how you are going to ingest data, what is required to make that data the most valuable it can be, and to hold your organization accountable as different types of imaging or different service areas come on board, and really kind of hold to that strategy that you've developed.
That's excellent.
Yeah, as we kind of ran to the digital era, you know, I think it would we kind of put the cart before the horse. I think backing up and really looking at your data from the last few years as you acquired those meaningful use, in making sure that you go back, look at that data. If you've done a migration with an EHR or a PACS, you'll know your gaps. You know where to go fix it. Really go fix that data and put the workflows in place to support. Make sure you acquire the data that you need.
That's excellent. So we have a little bit more time. So put your thinking caps on, because why don't we dive in a little bit to just best practices in general. So you're talking about data governance, data strategy, but where's a starting point, I guess, for your individual perspective? So if you're a CIO, and ask Tim and Drex the same question, if you're a CIO or a leader of a health system, you know, kind of where do you start with some of this? Because it can be overwhelming. We actually heard 86% haven't even started, you know, haven't even passed some of the initial testing for this. And so where do you start as a CIO and a leader of a healthcare system if you want to get, you know, a little data governance strategy, you know, moving forward and better together?
So I think you start by listening. Go into your different service areas, understand what their workflows are, understand what, as a clinician, they need to see in the data, and then that will help drive your strategy. So I really think before action is taken,
absolutely,
listening needs to occur.
Fantastic.
For me, the advice is start small, or start with a specific scope. A healthcare organization, very significant size, lots of things going on at all times, competing priorities and whatnot. Pick something that's small. Start somewhere and build that groundswell of what we can do with data governance.
Excellent.
Yeah, understanding your different service lines, I think, is key. Understanding the needs of each of the service line, and again, like Jeff said, start small. You know, ingest one at a time. Find yourself an enterprise solution that fits your service lines, and really hound in on what's needed within each one, and ingest those into your enterprise solution one at a time. Make sure you do a good job at it. You don't want to just turn and burn it, have a bad experience. Because if you ingest those one at a time and you build that trust, you're going to have a lot more buy-in from the rest of your facility.
That's excellent. So thinking ahead a little bit of the crystal ball, where do you see, I guess, the leaders? Because everybody wants to be a leader. Where do you see in 3 to 5 years from now this evolving, and what will the most innovative organizations be doing that you would recommend? Where do you think they're going to, in 3 to 5 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to be innovative, you start with your clean data set, and it gives you a lot of opportunity to participate in things like population health, AI, analytics, and you can really drive and be an innovator when you're able to participate in those.
Excellent. You're gonna.
My train of thought, didn't I? The question was, where are we going to be in 5 years, or what should we be doing now?
Yeah. What are they going to be doing to be a leader?
For me, I think it's about focusing a little bit on what you talked about in terms of the data quality, but I also think it's a little bit about the platform, making sure we've got the scale in mind of what we're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. In today's world, a lot of our clinical systems are oriented around the physicians. They're or techs or nurses, but there is a certain finite set of people within a hospital that are operating on the data, interacting with our information systems. I think in the near future, we're going to see more and more deployment of AI, and whether that's inside of the EMR or whether it's specialized AI working on image sets or whatever, there's going to be more and more AI. I think we want to think about each of those AI algorithms as another user. And so if we have now tens of those things or hundreds of those things operating on the data, we need to be thinking about the back end of our systems. And how is it that we're going to actually scale and make that information accessible by all of those algorithms?
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it's to go along with the comments made. I think it is really watching what innovation is coming out in the market. I mean, we are seeing just amazing advances. I think we can remember 10 years ago, I think it was Watson, IBM Watson that won the Jeopardy game, right? And that was run on a supercomputer, right? Lots of computing process. And now with GPT, sorry about that, it's early, I haven't had my coffee too much. With ChatGPT, we can literally download an application to our PC and run that right on our home PC, right? So keep an eye on the technologies, keep an eye on what's going on in the cloud and the capabilities coming from the cloud, and be open to thinking about things differently, because there's just an amazing amount of tech coming our way and record speeds that we can take advantage of.
That's excellent. So thinking about trends even, what are you guys seeing? I mean, for again, I go back to the CIO, a lot of the audience here. What are the trends they should be looking forward to or looking out for in this sector? I mean, obviously we were having a lot of. I mean, on the negative side, we have obviously a lot more attacks than ever before. Our nation states are coming at us in every way. We talked about Tim and Drex talked about that beforehand. I mean, so that's a bad trend. But I mean, is this becoming more mainstream? Is the conversation picking up? Are people actually trying to take this much more seriously? I mean, are the trends there? Are there good trends, bad trends? What are you guys seeing out there from your perspective?
Yeah, let's start with cybersecurity. I think they have to, right? We hear Tim and Drex talk about this. But there was an IBM study introduced last year that talked about the average size of an attack is costing them about $10 million.
$10 million.
$10 million
Wow.
as a size that. So that's important. The other aspect is apart from the financial, is to think about how long you can go as a healthcare institution without your information systems, right? Because it will take some time to restore and get back to operational. So this is something that really truly affects the entire business.
Yep.
So cybersecurity, a very important trend, of course.
Yep. Excellent.
And I think that comes with geodiversity on how you retain your data and the copies of your data. And cloud certainly offers some interesting options for that, from geodiversity for your data retention, as well as some increased capabilities to protect against ransomware. And I think that's the big thing today, is really protecting that data and reducing the amount of impact that ransomware has by being able to have those air gap copies, or those gold copies that are immutable or indelible, so that you can quickly restore from a ransomware attack. And his mic is just...
Yeah, it's starting to sag, isn't it? It's kind of fun.
Oh, that's great. Randy, anything you would want to add to that?
Yeah, I think as CIOs really go out and look and shop and try to come up with solutions, I think integration is one of the biggest things that I would recommend to assure before you try to develop your solutions. We've kind of bolted things together, and I think it's time to take a step back and kind of make it more fluent, make it more integrated for the clinical staff.
Yeah, that's my follow-up question, because we talk about, we haven't talked about interoperability a lot. You talk about integration there, but so where does interoperability play in this? It's a big sector in my world, and so, yeah, please.
Huge.
Yeah, so when you talk about interoperability, do you mean the standards, the actual data in transit, the security of the data in transit? I mean, what are the components there of interoperability? All of the above?
For me, that's all of it, isn't it? Of course. We need to make sure the data can get to the place where the clinicians, the techs, the nurses are going to be able to use the data, right? And so it is about all of those things. We have healthcare standards, of course. Those standards have technologies. We need to worry about the cybersecurity. So all of those things. And super important, I don't think there's ever going to be a time where healthcare is dominated by one single vendor, despite the attempts. There's always going to be lots of different pieces that have to come together to deliver for the clinicians.
More than ever before, every day. You got it.
I mean, look at the show floor. It's twice as big as it was last year. So always more vendors. So you're always coming into an environment where there is existing stuff. The hospital has existing infrastructure. And so interoperability, integration with those existing components, number one.
Yep. Excellent.
And I think it's, it's thinking outside of the walls of your organization and how you're truly going to make data interoperable for the good of humankind, right? And being able to share that data widely, anonymized or not, however your organization decides to go about it, but to be able to really capitalize on the wealth of data that is captured in a variety of socioeconomic settings, bringing it together so that we can have the most powerful outcomes possible that's going to serve the greatest population possible.
Excellent. Randi?
Yeah, I think better patient outcomes come from interoperability.
Absolutely.
And, we're kind of in a day right now where, if you walk in on a radiologist reading a mammogram or a, breast MRI, there's potential that they have, 3 or 4 different systems that they're logging into to read out a breast MR. And that needs to be more fluid.
Excellent. So how do you guys, kind of in closing here, how do you guys, on the interoperability side, is there somewhere you guys point to a standard that you guys like, you support, that you've worked towards, or recommend people, take seriously? I mean, like Smart on Fire or anything like that can help, your world and benefit you and your providers?
Absolutely. And many of them, of course, right? Because there's different aspects. So DICOM, HL7, some of these things have been with us for a long time. But FHIR is a new and emerging one that we're tracking very eagerly to, again, facilitate more information exchange. So that's sort of core to the Canon medical DNA, is really thinking about the interoperability, thinking about open standards.
Excellent.
I think it's actually taking advantage of data standards that already exist.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, we've had the RADLEX lexicon, for years, but how many organizations still recreate every day what they're going to call an exam or study descriptor? It's like they're already there. Let's use what's already created.
Very true. Excellent.
Yeah, again, I think some more updated regulations around digital versus film would always help, but I think just really keeping your data integrity up is going to be your biggest challenge and your most important challenge.
Excellent. Great advice to close the sector. So thank you very much. Everybody, appreciate your time. Thank you for joining the show today, and I hope you guys have the rest of your conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
You got it. And certainly thank you to everyone that joined me, Mari Savickis, Tim Dawson, Drex DeFord, Jeff, Randi, and Kim. You guys have been terrific. So certainly thank you to Canon Medical for sponsoring this past hour or so, and certainly to CHIME, DHI for the stage. And thank you to everyone for listening. We'll have a great show. We'll pick back up again tomorrow. We'll have Mickey Tripathi, so we'll talk about interoperability much more coming up tomorrow. But we thank everybody for listening here in the audience, everybody online. I'm Justin Barnes, and special thank you for tuning into this Just In Radio. Thank you so much. Oh boy.
Thank you.
You got it.
Welcome to a special episode of the Incrementalist here at ViVE 2023. Thanks to CHIME and DHI for inviting us to their theatre. I'm your host, Dr. Nick, and I'm delighted to introduce this 1-hour program with my speakers and colleagues on this panel talking about equity. I am not going to do them the disservice of introducing them because I would mess all of the things up, and I think it's much better if you hear their personal story and a little bit about them before we get into the panel. So if I could, I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourself one by one.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Solomon Banjo. I lead life sciences research here at Advisory Board, which means a lot of the research for and about life science companies, which when it comes to health equity is not only an element of what they need to be doing differently to enable this, but also how they can contribute, partner with other stakeholders. Now, earlier you were saying we didn't give you enough fun facts, so my fun fact for the audience, and we can take guesses at the end for where we were born, is we were born in the same country. So whoever wins or guesses what that is, you
get a free annual subscription to you're not.
The advisory.
I was going to say another notebook, but we can talk about that too. So guesses after the recording for where we were both born.
Wow.
There's going to be some heavy texting in the background just to make sure that the right people win, right?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Darby Sullivan. I'm the Director of Health Equity Research at Advisory Board, so I've worked with Solomon and Ty for many years now. And my focus really spans the entire industry. So I have worked with both of them a lot in terms of how life sciences companies, how digital health companies, how provider organizations, health plans, et cetera, can make tangible change towards their health equity goals. The past year, we've been focused specifically on behavioral health from an equity perspective, and so I'm sure I'll bring that into the conversation today. I don't have a really fun fact for you. I was not born in that country that you both were born in, so.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Ty Aderhold. I'm the Director of Digital Health Research at Advisory Board. Which really means I'm focused on everything that you're hearing about, surrounding this conference at ViVE, telehealth, AI, anything digital health related is sort of our focus area for research. And specifically related to equity, for the past couple of years, our team is focused on a term we call digital equity, making sure that the technology we're bringing out, whether it's a telehealth tool or a digital therapeutic, increasing the access to that, making sure that all patients and members can use those tools. Fun fact, for me, I'll go a different direction, not where I was born, but outside of the office, I do coach Ultimate Frisbee, and I'm actually the head coach of the professional women's Ultimate Frisbee team back in DC.
Fantastic. Well, so first of all, welcome to the panel. Thank you for joining me. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be here at ViVE. Obviously, exciting opportunity to engage with both the customers, the users of our systems, and obviously in this particular instance, the one thing I've noticed at this show is that everything seems to be, or at least a large part of it, is focused on health equity. And I said this at the outset, and, I want to pick a little bit on you, Ty, because you said, well, we're going to, digital equity and digital health equity. And one of the challenges that I have with equity just in general is, well, okay, so we introduce digital tools, but that further increases the divide. And I know that's a little bit unfair, and it seems to just jump straight into the sort of core issue. But is there an ROI in equity? Is there a way that we can actually start delivering on the promise that I think, let's be frank, we all want this. I mean, there is nobody, at least not in my circles, that say, oh no, we don't want to have equal distribution of healthcare. We do, but we're failing. How do we get past this?
I can jump in there to start. It's a question we get all the time from the executives that we work with across the entire industry. So how do I prove the ROI for this health equity investment or this social determinant of health effort? And usually they're not saying it because they think, oh, I just only will do it if it's a business priority, but because their leadership is coming them to and saying, how do I make sure that I'm spending my money in the right way? It's absolutely possible to show an ROI depending on your business model. But of course, we know in the healthcare industry, like someone's cost is another person's gains. And so you kind of have to go really specific about what is your organization, what is your business model, how deep are you in value-based care or fee-for-service to actually kind of run those numbers. But something I tend to try to push back on is the notion of are we demanding something from health equity investments that we don't demand from other strategic priorities? So I was once speaking to an executive at a health system in the Northeast, and she said, nobody asks me what the ROI for primary care is. Like, I don't have to justify the investments for primary care. Like, we just do it because it's part of our identity. It's what we think is right. It's what we believe will have a long-term impact on our business and on our community. So are we holding health equity to us a standard that's a bit higher than we hold other strategic investments? If so, we should interrogate why.
So how do you go about doing that?
Well, one thing I'll add that ties on to what Darby said, also the question you directed at Ty, is I think we need to ask better questions. So when I hear often, oh, we've done equity initiatives, if you ask, well, what does that look like? How involved were the communities? When you start poking and prodding at things, it's actually like you did something with the intent of impacting equity, but there are a lot of built-in assumptions, fundamental things that you have not interrogated appropriately to actually have a solution that has the patient impact that you could even then start to think about as an ROI. So to your question about, digital divide and these tools are making the matters worse, something I see from the life sciences perspective is they're trying to make progress here. And I think Ty might agree also happens in digital health is who's the archetype you're designing for? And the thing I will often say is if your clinical trial improvements make it easier for me, Solomon, to participate, you've functionally done nothing. I can participate in the clinical trials if I'm interested. I have the means, I have all the other things that you need to interrogate, even the trust being in healthcare to say, okay, I see the value of clinical research, but who are those people that by having that many in-person visits, or when you think about the non-clinical exclusion criteria you build into a trial, an app, etc., that you're leaving by the wayside, not by chance, but actually by design decisions, whether conscious or not, you can't even get to seeing the meaningful impact and the ROI, if you will, if such a thing is the right question to ask. And so that's where I often come from is just, okay, let's think about the questions and turn them internally and say, who are we designing for and for what outcome? But Ty, not sure if you'd add anything.
I would say the same is true when you look at digital health solutions companies. I think oftentimes you hear the message of telehealth can expand access, digital health can expand access, at the same time that solutions are designed mostly for convenience sake. They're not designed actually to improve access to those who don't currently have access. And so I think that is one thing the industry needs to grapple with. If we're going to say that these technologies are going to improve access, how do we build those technologies differently, and what supports do we bring to surround those technologies to actually ensure they are reaching that stated goal of improving access to care?
So as you think about the concept of digital enablement and the opportunity that potentially has to bring to improve access in some respects, I mean, we have a sort of core issue, core problem that starts even before that. If you think about the 20-odd million, or maybe it's 40 million people that don't even have internet access or don't have access to technology. And I'm talking a basic laptop or even a decent phone. Let's talk, smartphone as opposed to a flip phone. How do you start to address that as part of the building blocks when that's completely outside of healthcare?
It's a great question. I think something we sort of have pushed out into the market is you need to start thinking about technology access as you do other social determinants of health. So think about it the same way you might think about housing access or food insecurity, and invest in similar ways as you would maybe to support someone who is food insecure. The other thing I would say is you need to think beyond just broadband or device access. I think those are huge issues, but if you only focus on that, you will miss so many other components of digital inequity that are harder to see and harder to, in the long term, overcome. I'm thinking of something like digital literacy, or the fact that most digital health tools right now are being designed just with English as the language that they operate in. And so that is severely limiting to those individuals who English is not their first language. And so we need to think beyond just broadband, also because that's going to be probably the hardest of all those various factors for healthcare organizations to deal with. But it doesn't mean just because you can't go solve the broadband issue, you can't solve other parts of it.
When you say it's the hardest issue, what specifically is the hardest issue that you're referencing there?
I would say healthcare organizations maybe have the least amount of control in terms of solving gaps in broadband. And, this is not just a rural issue as well. I do want to bring up that this is in cities too. If you go block by block across, Detroit, many other downtown areas, there's huge gap in high-speed broadband cables that have been laid down and connection points to homes. And so it's a major problem. I think it's one that is hard to grapple with, and I don't want the takeaway to be, well, we can't, we're not Verizon, we can't solve this part, so we're going to ignore the digital equity piece. There's so many other factors that you can address.
So you don't ignore it. To your point, Solomon, I think going to the source is exactly right. Ask the question, what problem are we solving for, and how do we address that? Is it as simple as that? Is it as simple as asking the people? It seems trite, but I don't mean to be.
I think one of the challenges is there are a lot of technical elements to this problem that you can design for, think through. What tends to separate where I see more progress being made versus not are these other, we call them adaptive challenges, the things that go and force you to question your role built-in assumptions. And I think having, for lack of a better word, appropriate humility, because you mentioned, the people who are missing from this picture because they may not have access. I'm thinking about all the resources out here talking about being data-informed, data-driven. I think we also have to have the humility as a healthcare system to say what we all know, which is there are a lot of Americans who are not in that data. So if we're only designing based on what that data, those practice patterns, and who conforms and is legible, because we haven't excluded things because they're too messy, we're going to find it hard to actually make progress here. And so one example to bring it back to life sciences that we see is when I'm talking to patient advocacy groups about what would you like to see happen differently to enable change. One example that stuck with me is a lot of your clients come to me, Solomon, with a specific request that they'll fund. And they'll give us money to support this thing. But I get pulled in this direction by one, this direction by another, this direction by another. They hardly ever ask me where the patients I represent want healthcare to go. And so if you started and changed the paradigm to say, we are here to support, to enable, to build, and really make that trust seem meaningful, what data should we be collecting? What are the things that matter to you that we should be focusing on that, yes, have implications for us as a life science company, but when we then get to funding this, these outcomes that matter to these patient populations, do we incent them? Do we care about them? Do we give clinical weighting to those? And so those are some of the things I will hit on where there are, for certain things, the technical challenges for like clinical trials. Lots of great research out there. My team looked at if there was anything we could add. We said, no, we're going to have links directing to those technical solutions. But it's around these adaptive challenges. These health plans have a perspective, life sciences have a perspective, and there's heterogeneity within even those sectors. We need to stop running from that and actually trying to address that. And I know we're talking about health equity here, but that's what we need to do to fix healthcare. And part of what I love about the health equity conversation beyond the mission piece is it's a place to develop those muscles that I think we will all need to achieve, thinking back to some of the keynotes we heard today, that untapped potential of healthcare that works for everyone in a way that's meaningful for them. So it's a great testing ground, and that's something I don't think we talk about enough, and that could maybe get more buy-in to have those difficult conversations.
Darby?
I also think... So to agree with everything you said, Solomon, but also
we talked about this. There's no agreeing on this panel.
Yes to that. In addition, though, I think we could endlessly talk about trying to describe the problem, but in reality, in many of these situations, we full well know what the issue is. We actually don't have to spend many more years, many more focus groups, really getting to the right people and asking them what they need when it's pretty transparent in a lot of ways. I mentioned, we just looked at behavioral health for the past year. And if you look at all of the massive investment in behavioral health startups from a digital health perspective, and you look at which condition sets those are targeted to, they're all targeted to the lower acuity patients, which is not a bad thing, but that's a clear gap right there of, so maybe this is not going to be the access silver bullet that we want it to be if we can't care for high acuity patients with schizophrenia via an app. Okay, so maybe that shouldn't be the end all be all of our strategy here. So I use that as an example to say, sometimes the answer is right in front of us, and we should move quicker to action versus continuing to stare at the problem.
So that brings me back to a more fundamental question. I mean, I agree with you, and I said I wouldn't, but I will for this particular instance.
No, fair.
It is. It's obvious. One of my favorite phrases is by obviosity. You look at it and go, well, duh, yet we still haven't fixed it.
Right.
Why? Why are we not able to make that jump or leap? I feel there's something within the pieces that you're talking about that really sort of get to this. I don't believe it's a lack of willingness. I just don't. Not fundamentally. But there's a mismatch somewhere. Where is that mismatch?
I'm not sure this is the entirety of it, but as you were talking about, I think when we're talking to different stakeholders about what they want from digital health, one of the complaints they talk about is there are all these point solutions out there. There's no holistic approach. I think in healthcare, often we treat the human as point solutions. Like I'm thinking of some of the ways Darby and I have collaborated the most in the past when I was an international team was on population health management. And the number of times the obviosity, the thing was, oh, they're humans.
Oh.
The reason this isn't working is we're just thinking about them as their conditions. But if you start saying, oh, well, by living a healthier life or having this under control, what would motivate you in a meaningful way? Then it's like, oh, seeing my grandchildren, being able to pick up and play with them. These are the things that will motivate me to have that behavior change. But we insist on not viewing them as like humans. And I think part of the challenge with health equity, back to my point about partnership, is if you only approach it out of the obvious self-interest, you will take that point solution approach, where you will say, oh, the thing that I see the benefit from is clinical trials. But if you maybe take a step back and say, okay, well, if we're maybe moving toward a value-based care where we're paying for performance so we care about outcomes, race-based corrections are rampant in healthcare. So are the outcomes and metrics we use, how could we work with all stakeholders to actually question those and actually make sure we're measuring things better? Example I give personally is had an annual 2 years ago. I know that's not annual, but hear me out. Where I showed my mother-in-law, who's a family physician, I had a question, and she was like, that is the best kidney function I have ever seen. And it stuck with me because I know for a fact that is one of the most prominent, and it's actually being phased out, race-based corrections. So I can maybe assume I have really good kidneys, but maybe not, LeBron James, Michael Jordan good kidneys, which is what that would make us feel. And that has real implications if you extrapolate that out on transplant lists and all these other things that will ultimately result in worse healthcare outcomes. So I think pushing to be, yes, there's the stuff that might be self-interested or your clear ROI, but if you look at the patient populations that you care about, where are the places that maybe you don't have an obvious ROI or you need to make a hard trade-off to actually allow those communities, those people, actually live fuller and healthier lives. And the number of times we just come back to, oh, they're not patients, they're people. I always have that in the back of my mind, like, oh, why is something not working? Are we asking the right questions? Have we considered that maybe they're people?
And Solomon, something you just said, I think that we should be honest when sometimes there is not a good ROI for a health equity investment, which does not mean we don't do it. But when I think that there's a tendency to never want to admit that this could be bad for our bottom line. I think we should acknowledge when something is bad for our bottom line and then rethink, hey, maybe our business model is problematic. Maybe the way we're structured is actually inherently making our lives harder. And that's the number one reason I think we haven't made progress, is that the incentive structures are misaligned. So I think sometimes we should run at the harder truths, which are, hey, this is not good for our bottom line, but we do a lot of things that aren't good for our bottom line, but they're worth doing anyways. That's a piece of this that I think folks tend to not want to talk about.
And I'll add in, just in the digital health space specifically, I think we're in a reinforcing sort of cycle, a vicious cycle right now of, you're a startup or an early stage company, you get some consumers using your product, those consumers are the most connected, most well off of the group, you then, based on their behavior, redesign, change your app to fit their needs. And then as you grow larger, you wonder why it's only those same consumer types using the tool, and now we have digital health built for convenience that's not expanding access. And so it needs to start very early on to be able to break that cycle. You have to be able to invest outside of just building that specific function in some of those expansions of broadband that we talked about previously, in order to break that cycle, get better data on wider parts of the population, and then have tools that can actually expand access and improve health equity.
So take that point, and I think it was you that brought up the sort of point versus holistic, Solomon. Is maybe one of the requirements here, I'm going to go out there and say, enough of the point solutions. I mean, we keep going to Silicon Valley and, innovators and say, oh, come up with, it's got to be outside. And is part of that problem that those people outside focus on those small, narrow solutions? And we should force the issue and say, unless you can do it in a rural healthcare setting, it doesn't apply?
I think it's easy to throw the blame that way, I think. But I think we also have to think about, there's a reason why they do go after the point solutions, because that's what's being bought. That works for them.
That's where the money is.
That's where the money is. That's where, health systems and payers will go out and fund you or buy your product. And so it's just as much, in conversations, are you pushing these solutions companies to take a different approach as much as just what they are sort of building. And I think a big piece of that is it is very appealing to sit down and think, oh, we can get more consumers into our platform digitally or into our system digitally if we invest in these tools and not think about the access side of things.
So clearly the money and the investors' fault.
At least partially.
Okay, so a broader set of requirements. One of the things I certainly occurs to me as I'm listening to you about that sort of influence and at the level of the individual, this strikes me as behavioral change more than anything, because there's a lack of trust, huge amount missing, certainly in the populations that we're talking about, for a number of extraordinarily good reasons. How do we overcome that? You mentioned it a little bit, talking about the grandparents, reframing. And I saw this very effectively with flu shots. Saw a massive increase from 20% uptake of grandparents to somewhere north of 80%, all by simply changing, not protecting you, protecting your grandchildren. Is there some component to this that allows us to sort of find messaging and behavioral change that will improve the uptake so that we can see this rolled out in a better way?
I'll take a first stab, and I'll actually connect it to your previous question as well, because part of my inherent reticence with the centralizing, not allowing that, is I don't know what the right approaches are. And so I think there's an element of allowing for innovation and creativity, asking the right questions, thinking about people appropriately that could be beneficial here. And so that is one of the ways, as you're talking about that, where I could see, well, what's the most effective way to approach that? I also think what you're hitting on that maybe Ty said more eloquently than I would, but I want to double down, is we need to recognize that we like to talk about inequity as if it's a bug of the system, not a feature of decisions we're making, either by what we're incenting, how we're thinking about things. There's a real reason, I know we're agreeing a lot on here. Professionally, we disagree a lot because we want the best ideas to come out.
Right.
And what Darby said of when we did a root cause analysis, how much of it was, it would be much easier for me to do this if you change this incentive you apply to me, but I have no way to compel you to do that, and you seem to have no interest or desire to do that. And so what has been interesting is seeing people getting more creative, or even saying, I think it's Blue Cross Blue Shield Massachusetts, saying, okay, well, we've known this problem for a long time. This is the first time we'll actually say we're going to hold money attached to it. I'm not saying they're necessarily having the right criteria, because that is hard, but saying we're going to try things differently. And so your approach of, well, behaviorally, how do we think about it differently? One thing I personally would like to see change is you are 100% right about the historical mistrust. My personal mistrust is as a result of the care I've received as an individual, where in my direct interactions, despite being in this field, having higher health literacy than your average Jane or Joe, I have experienced situations that give me real pause. And so I think there's an element of how do we also think about, we may want behavioral change. Do we know how to do that? Have we earned the right to be the ones to do that? And are we, again, circling back like a broken record, are we actually caring about what the humans want? Or are we only trying to change the behaviors that ultimately only serve us, which is probably not going to be as sticky?
Define the we here, because I think that's...
the entire ecosystem.
Okay.
I think this is one where I mentioned the feature, the bug. It is that interwoven incentives, different perspectives that leads to suboptimal at the macro level decision. And so it's why I know we wanted to have this conversation across the different perspectives we bring, because none of the sectors we represent are saints, but they're also not purely villains. And including health plans, we don't have anyone represented here, but same is true there. So the we is all of us in this room, and the organizations we represent is the we I'm talking about.
Right.
And you asked about behavior change for, I think, the communities we're trying to impact. My bigger concern is behavior change for healthcare executives. Like, I want to change their behavior because they're the ones that are making decisions that either make healthcare harder to access or healthcare decisions harder to make or easier to make. And so I think reframing who I think our problem people are, lovingly, is something that will give us way more mileage in the end than inadvertently putting blame upon the communities that we so much don't want to.
I can see where you're going, and I'm just going to give just a shout out to the senior executives. They do not go into work wanting to find a way to give crap care. They don't. Everybody goes in with the intention of delivering great care. But I've heard, and specifically, and I think you're right, it's attained at the C-suite. Those are the people with control. Those individuals are so engrossed in the day-to-day, just almost survival and firefighting, that they never really get to sort of rise out. So it's not an intent, it's an ability to allow them to see, is it the wood for the trees or the trees for, I don't know which way around it is in this particular instance. So as you think about that, how do we do that? How do we give them the vision? Because I know they want, I feel it in my heart. They want to do it, they just are not equipped to do it. And we're back to ROI here, I'm afraid, because...
We are again. Yeah, no, it's a great question. It goes back to Solomon's example he was sharing about BCBS of Massachusetts, and they're not the only organization to do so, but they said, hey, actually, it would be easier for us to do health equity work if we were incentivizing our partners to do it well. So now they're the provider partners that they work with. In order to be considered a quality organization, they also have to be an equitable organization, which, like, again, when you say it now, you're like, duh, like that should have always been the case, but there was never any payment tied to a gap in outcomes, and now there is. And that just makes the work so much easier when you set yourself up for that ahead of time, versus, here's a situation I have to get a grant for, or always kind of like trying to stay afloat amid a crisis.
I'll also add on, those executives are humans too. And I bring that up because we all have blind spots. And so I actually think that assuming that any one person executive can have that 360-degree awareness, thinking of the third, fourth order consequences, is a borderline inhuman thing. So it's then like, what is our decision-making framework that is different? And how do we think about this? And so not to call out on like health systems in particular, but I often think of when I started my career doing a lot of service line ambulatory strategy. A question we would get a lot is, how do we improve our payer mix? made logical sense to me, how having better pay, the cross subsidy, like this is a thing you should care about. What's that actually implying baked into there? Is there people, because we will not get favorable reimbursement for them, we need to design systems that maybe we're not actively setting them aside, but we're sure not dedicating resources to think about how we can better engage them. And there have to be ways, it could be as simple about questions or looking around the room and saying, what perspectives don't we have that could potentially bring up something that would then give us a pause to think differently? And any sector, you'll have those equivalents of the payer mix of, this is a logical question going back to the incentives, but that actually if you interrogate it is going to lead you to, best case scenario, divert resources to specific groups who tend to already have a lot of resources, help. I can drive the 20, 30 minutes easily. I don't need another retail location near me. So what about those people, the AMC I live near, massive catchment area. I've done ride-alongs where we're going an hour and a half, then hiking up to get that patient, and then we're doing it again. The implications of that where, yeah, maybe they have to go to the tertiary center, but that's just going to have a different outcome. And if we're not asking about the right questions or considering the implications, well, it's not great for our payer mix to have a standalone site there, and you see the coverage deserts, all of these other issues where those backbone fundamental institutions keep getting underfunded, they go out and the problem just compounds. So I would say, when you're making these decisions, what perspectives aren't there? And how might that change the conversation, the considerations that your business would make if you had different perspectives from community, from other backgrounds? That might be like, wait, what does that actually mean? Well, what I hear you saying is that my community won't get these resources. But you're also showing me this data that's saying you care about this and you're doing these other things for my community. This doesn't make sense to me.
And then I'll just say that payer mix conversation hasn't gone away. It's just a consumer conversation now. When people say consumer, they're talking about a certain type of healthcare patient. And right. I promise you there are algorithms being built to help identify who are the ideal consumers that we want coming in. How do we appeal to them? And that is the focus. And, you can both be a leader who is actively wants to solve the health equity challenge and talk about it, but if you're also considering tools like that or thinking about consumers in that way, you might be unintentionally undermining your own efforts because of these other financial incentives that you are making decisions based on.
So you can't have a panel right now without mentioning ChatGPT if you want to be contextual. Just going to say.
Of course.
And as I hear you talking about that, and specifically the AI in this particular instance that is absolutely designed and is built with bias in based on, and I got into trouble. I said at one point, data, your data is biased, and I was told by some data geek that data doesn't have any bias. It's the people that use it. But put that to one side. There is bias in that data that is driving that, and there is definitely bias in the process to refine or pull that out.
Certainly.
We seem to be heading down. I mean, let's be clear. I think we are at a bigger than Google moment with this inflection point with this technology. And it hasn't changed that much, although GPT has done some significant things. But it's really raised its awareness and people are using it. If you're not using it, you should be using it right now. I'm just saying to the audience, you should. Ask all the questions. It answers everything. No, I'm kidding. But how do we cope with that? As you think about that, that to me is an enormous concern because we're using these tools and I got to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily think about it. I feel like I should have a little conscience, whatever the Disney character was that sat on your shoulder saying, whoa, hold on a second, you shouldn't be doing that because of all these things, because we don't. It's not always intentional. How do we cope with that?
Yeah, the immediate concern is that we are locking in the historical biases that have existed in medical research in perpetuity going forward. If we start to build sort of the basis of these tools with generative AI and other AI applications now, when we know there is so much bias in the data we have in our historical medical practices, we're starting from a bad baseline. And it is going to be so hard to, once that is done, walk that back, figure out, make it better long term. So I think it's not going to happen, but I would say slow down. We have to slow down and make sure we are doing this in the right way.
Have you met the people in Silicon Valley?
Oh, I know.
Can I add something in addition to the slow down? I had this moment last fall where it was like a week where yet another study showing the bias in this algorithm, the bias, and it's in some ways the no-duh obvious thing.
Obviosity is the word you're looking
Obviosity.
for, right? Yep.
And then I had this moment of, should I be grateful? Here's why, follow me. Because it has exposed, because it is magnifying what is happening in practice, it is just making it obvious what is happening in the data on which it was trained. So the example that came out, and to their credit, the study authors pointed this out, it had to do with, I think, a kidney function algorithm in the VA. And they pointed out, it is far less efficient for female veterans. And I just had this moment reading the comments, and they were saying why, and we think it's care delivery. And I said, what this algorithm has said that is uncomfortable for us as a society to interpret it as, because we want to blame them and cast blame, is actually say, now we can do better care. Because we know for a fact that there's a difference in care that this brought to light. So how do we need to change our care delivery model to better suit female veterans? And so that is the other, obviously not intended application. Everyone went in there hoping it would work as well for both, but clearly it's not because of all the bias, all of these things. And can AI actually alert us to where behavior change, not just the communities, behavior change for healthcare practice and how we design things to actually work better for those patient populations? Then we have better data, we have better care, we're building trust, we have a lot of these things. So now when I have this moment, I'm like, okay, add this to my whiteboard of places where there's demonstrated bias, courtesy of an algorithm. And now we can see, and do we allow those organizations, both who are developing the algorithm and delivering the care, to say, let's do better. And here's how we've done better. Now that obviosity, we can't ignore it.
So I think great point. I'm going to put you in the category of the pandemic was a good thing.
Oh, no.
Well, no, but here's why, and it's for the same principle. It had the silver lining of exposing all of the things that I think maybe some people knew but didn't, and it's shining a spotlight on all of those elements. And I've always been embarrassed to say that. Every time I say, the pandemic had a silver lining, that's a terrible thing to say because it was a terrible, terrible tragedy. Mm-hmm. But I think that's you're a spin doctor on this. You're putting a positive spin, and it's the appropriate thing because we have to find the positive value contribution. And in this case, I think that's good. I agree.
And here's why I want to do it as well, because if we don't get to a place where it is safe for organizations to say, we found bias, we're addressing it, what we're going to incent is covering up any proof of bias.
Yeah.
And that's just going to hard-code it. We're not actually going to see better patient outcomes. And that I view as far more concerning. You're just creating nothing but incentives for people to not admit what we all know to be true, but I don't want to be that headline.
Can I be the little mosquito in your ear, though, about this? And it's just, the concern I have is, all good, but you got to notice. And an awful lot of this stuff runs past, and if we do not stay vigilant to it, it will just, as you said, will just become incorporated into everything that we do. So be that mosquito or, conscience or whatever it is. I think we need that. Which brings me to another question around this that says, should we have a chief equity or chief conscience officer in healthcare facility. I mean,
I haven't heard of Chief Conscience Officer.
No, but I mean, that's what we need. And, you know, to your point of blindness and 360 vision, is that maybe the way to do it? And maybe they don't. Now I'm getting really meta. You know, that person then has inability to see, but is that maybe a starting point?
Well, there many organizations do have a chief health equity officer. I haven't heard conscience officer. That sounds new agey, so maybe it's in the digital health space. But yeah, that's absolutely a role that's been growing, which has been interesting to see. And some people ask us, like, is this the ticket to what will make our organization more equitable? Maybe if it's also paired with, if that person is paired with a team that has resources, like some of the basic stuff, because too often we say, oh, it's more of a nominal position than it is a real member of the C-suite that can wield influence and authority over other pieces of the organization too. It's the guidance that we give is like, yes, you absolutely need to have dedicated resources to this work if you want to make a difference, because if it's everyone's job, it's no one's job. But at the same time, if you only have a one and often small team dedicated to health equity, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because you're missing out on the opportunity for every single team and every single department, every single service line to actually playing a role here. So that means incorporating things like incentives and performance reviews, and making it, at the very least, looking at your departments and saying, does our health equity department have a conflicting financial incentive than our service line development department? And if so, how do we reconcile those things? So it's less about like, what is my specific org chart and like who's in my C-suite, and more about the investment across the organization. That's what we found.
Stick a stake in the ground and say, roughly speaking, what kind of percentage do you think, of that in the health systems that you're aware of? And the reason I ask that question is, I know I've been at these conferences for years, and we've got to have patients here. And sure, we do, and everybody says they're a patient. I'm very publicly a patient right now, so, and, you know, we all advocate, but do we advocate across the full spectrum of equity? And we seem to be continuing to miss that, because those people don't have the resource. What's the percentage, and how do you feel about that comparison?
The percentage of health systems?
With zero for health conscience, but health chief equity.
I would hate to put a number on it without the real data.
I know that goes completely against the grain. It's like 5%, less than 5%.
I would optimistically say 10%.
Okay, well, nobody's going to hold you to it.
Maybe.
It's just recorded forever after.
Yeah, I hope that's right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the opportunity for learning in other countries. And, you know, it was some of the things that I heard you talking about with the human aspect and being out there. And you told a story specifically of, you know, going out and having to climb the hill. And that reminds me a lot of some of the experiences that I'm familiar with, where other countries with far less resources actually get more on the ground, more capabilities to actually deliver care. Do we have things to learn from other places in your experience or not? Other countries, that is.
I mean, central to advisory board's ethos is finding those transferable insights. So I am inclined to say, obviously, we do. And I think that is where that intellectual humility also comes in that the solution may not be ChatGPT-5, but actually, let's consider the full...
Is that out? Oh, God, no.
Let's consider the full range of potential solutions and actually recognize that innovation is not always the flashy thing. And so that is where, even to this point, we talk about these communities in rural areas. I gave that example you're referencing. They are having to find a way to still support each other, navigate with the lack of resources. So there's an onus on us to figure out how do we make sure we are giving the appropriate resources, but also what are the things you can actually teach us about what works and what works in your environment as well, because that is the other thing where taking that solution, to Ty's point, that has been overly engineered, even in the same country, but for specific patient populations, and then saying that's going to transfer even within the country. It's like, no, you have made I was talking about this earlier with a colleague, where that's a bespoke suit. It's only going to look good on one person, versus how do you actually have a more tailored approach that's going to look good, but you can still take it off the rack, not to get all sartorial here. But that is what I think can be applied within the U.S. and certainly to other countries. But I don't even think we have learned all the lessons within our borders.
Right.
And so how do we actually say, okay, intellectual humility, what would it look like in these places that don't have these, and innovate? Because oftentimes, you hear the adage, innovation is the intersection of constraint and purpose. That constraint. These communities have constraints, so how are they innovating? Because healthcare is something that everyone wants to have more of. So what are they doing to try and support that? How do we scale that, but also how do we still make sure we're giving them resources? Because I don't want it to seem like, oh, everything's perfect there. To your point, the data, the gaps in life expectancy, rural versus urban alone, then you add on other layers, it's a bleak picture. But I do think there are absolutely lessons to be learned.
Okay. So switching gears, let's talk behavioral health.
Sure.
Again, another spotlight. Oh my God, did we know that we had this much bad, karma in the world? I think we knew, but I don't think we knew it was as bad. It's definitely gotten worse and disproportionately impacts. How are we addressing that? How do we go about addressing that?
Big question. Luckily, I've spent the past year researching it.
I only ask big questions.
Something we found early in our research in behavioral health is that when you want to talk about equity in behavioral health, there's actually two levels. So I call it the meta inequity. I'm trying to get it to catch on, if you want to hashtag that. But there's, of course, the demographic disparities that we see across every other healthcare condition, what have you. Like, we know that. But there's also this inherent inequity and separation and siloing of behavioral health from the rest of physical healthcare that I think we also know too. But that means that no matter your identity, no matter your background, if you're a patient with a behavioral health condition, you're inherently going to have a worse experience and worse access and worse outcomes than your counterpart without one. So there's this sort of double level of dysfunction that we see in behavioral health care. It's similar to the broader conversations about health equity, because though everyone wants it to get better, it's getting worse every day. And so we tried to figure out, okay, what is the advice we can give healthcare executives that go beyond a Band-Aid approach, yet another pilot program, something that might help 10 patients a year or a small patient population, but what would it actually take to restructure the healthcare system? Because I think right now there's a lot of promise, especially with digital health. Like I mentioned, this access at any cost. Like this could be the thing that helps us, but it not only will not nearly meet the full range of need because the tools aren't designed for all behavioral health patients, but it could only exacerbate existing problems of fragmentation across providers and health plans, and real concerns around quality. Like I think if we think about the Cerebrals of the world that have gotten into hot water because they moved too quickly, too much too quickly. So the guidance that we have started to give to healthcare executives is around rethinking some basic elements of care. How do we even define quality care in behavioral health when it's not as simple as just taking your blood draw and seeing what the numbers look like? How do we come to consensus between health plans and provider organizations on reimbursement? Because both will tell you what we're doing now is not enough and not good enough. And then how can we take a strong, pointed look at reducing the demographic disparities that we see in behavioral health care that's unique to that sector?
Briefly, digital health solving that problem?
I don't think so. Everything I've seen sort of in the behavioral health, digital health space, and we've had conversations around this, it's going after such low acuity conditions and providing just a sort of minimum level of care for those low acuity conditions, and there's so much risk at stake right now too for when things go wrong, that I certainly don't think patient-facing digital health is the solution here. Maybe some clinician supports that I think could help along the way, and that might be an angle to look at first, but on the patient-facing side, I would say no.
And I'll add on to that anyone going at this alone will fail.
Fair enough. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, as we always do in my show, so just remains for me to thank Darby, Solomon, and Ty for being very gracious and indulging my humor. Thank you to the advisory board for sponsoring this and making this happen at the show. Thanks to CHIME and DHI for allowing us to incorporate this into the stage here. Thank you to the audience who came, attended. We appreciate you. And to the audience out there live, online, good for you as well. We appreciate you out there. I'm Dr. Nick, I'm the Incrementalist, and I host a podcast called The Incrementalist. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How to get down safely. Just all rotate.
Hi, this is Dr. Nick. I'm the Incrementalist here with the Incrementalist show. Actually, forget that. I'm going to redo that because that's not how mine goes, so forgive me. And this week, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. David Nash. He is the Dean Emeritus of the Jefferson College of Population Health and a practicing internist. David, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. Thanks again.
So we're talking how COVID crashed the system. I'm just going to say that's a great title.
Thank you.
Obviously, I think we're all aware of the experiences, the challenges. You've put this all into a book, and I had a little bit of time to sort of review this, so I want to sort of focus on several things. But first of all, tell us about your personal experiences through this pandemic from the initial phases, if you would.
Sure. So, Nick, great to be here. Great to be together face to face. Thank goodness we're able to do this.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So let's just take a moment.
Right.
So look, how COVID crashed the system. This is my labor of love, my guilt trip, my exorcism during the almost 3 years of the pandemic. I live in suburban Philadelphia. I've been a faculty member at Jefferson for more than 30 years. My wife's a doctor, I'm a doctor, and we have a daughter who is a hospitalist, an attending hospitalist. And at the very beginning of the pandemic, she was going to work wearing a garbage bag over her white coat. Didn't have enough gloves. You get the idea?
Oh, yeah.
And so my wife and I were worried that she was going to die. And I was safely at home doing my thing. Charles Wolforth, my co-author, super good guy, science writer in Princeton, called me and said, you need to put a voice to your work. And I said, oh, man, I'm not sure I could do that. But Charles prevailed, and together, 18 months of work, another 6 months at the publisher, and here we are. And I'm thrilled to tell you that this book, which is not about COVID, the virus, but about what COVID did to the healthcare system and what opportunities we have to fix what's broken, was a very personal journey for me and for Charles, and as it turns out, for my family.
So I think, to be fair, I think it did a number on all of us in a variety of ways. We all sort of experienced it in different forms. Obviously, and your image is not lost on me. I actually lived a little bit of that when I was doing some support work. And, a total travesty of a whole range of issues.
Unbelievable.
And yet, I just want to confirm, we are living in the United States of America, right? This is where this is coming from.
Yes, it is. And so you hit it on the head, of course, Nick. So look, when Charles and I started the journey together, where do you even begin, right? When we started the book, 50,000 Americans had died. And you remember the outrage that was equal to the number of casualties in the Vietnam War, right?
Right.
So now we're at 1.3 million, more than any other country on a per capita basis in the world.
Counting.
And counting. It's roughly 3,000 deaths a week in the United States. So, look, let's make an analogy. September 11, 2001. 3,000 Americans die in 2 attacks, right? 20 plus years later, we're still taking our shoes off at the airport. We have a cabinet level secretary. We're still talking about it. We're still fighting terrorism. And now the current administration, for all kinds of good and bad reasons, has essentially disbanded the entire COVID apparatus at the White House level. Ashish Jha is going back to being dean at Brown.
See, I had not heard.
Right.
Wow.
So, look, there's amazing. But the 3 things that Charles and I focused on, it's easy to think about. American individualism, American exceptionalism, and American federalism. Easy. Let's take it 1, 2, 3, right?
Right.
So, American individualism, look, we're still in the covered wagon, heading out onto the, getting to the Oregon Trail to see the Pacific Ocean, meaning,
Can I just interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Because I just watched one of the Yellowstone prequels,
There you go.
and I actually know what that means now. And oh my God, that's awful.
Right. So it's, we're surrounded, and so not in my backyard, and I know, and you can't tell me what to do because I'm a survivor. So that's the individualism. Exceptionalism was, hey, my unbelievably courageous doctor colleagues at Jefferson were on the phone with doctors in Italy pre-Christmas 22 because those Italian doctors were saying to us, hey, get ready, you have no idea how bad this thing is.
Right.
And American exceptionalism was, well, not invented here, I don't have to pay too much attention.
Oh my God.
And then federalism, you remember when governors were getting the National Guard to protect the ventilators at the Maryland airports?
I do.
Right. Or if you had a New York State license plate, you could get arrested driving into Rhode Island.
That's right.
Anybody remember? Right. So
there was
crazy stuff.
Checkpoints going into Florida
That's
at one
right.
point.
Checkpoint Charlie.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So individualism, exceptionalism, federalism, that's what we went through.
So let's focus for a second, if we can, on some of the positives that came out, because I think there were, and you highlight so many areas that I think it's easy to forget, but we shouldn't, and we'll come back to the whole issue of that decommissioning of the capabilities and the importance of
sadly.
that. But before we do that, I want to just highlight a couple of things that I recall as a clinician. One of the things that was set up really quickly was 2 things. It was a WhatsApp group of clinicians, and it was a Google Doc of here's what we know and learn.
Yeah.
Just
Great.
To be clear, WhatsApp
Yeah.
and Google Docs,
Right.
and they were highly effective,
Highly effective,
thankfully.
yeah. So we actually have a term for that in the book. Let me tell you, and yes, and Google and all the rest. But we described it as the incident command culture. That's what you're really saying. And let me give 2 minutes on what that's all about. So every hospital that has Medicare paying patients and covered by Medicare has to have an incident command, INCE. An incident occurs, pandemic being a great example. So there's a whole structure that's stood up to handle the emergency. And there's protocols that every hospital in America, 200-bed community hospital, 800-bed Jefferson University Hospital, has an incident command. But what did that evolve into was some really powerful cultural change in our business. Specifically, the ability to say, hey, this disease is evolving on a daily basis. We want feedback from the people who are at the front lines. We want to know what's working and what's not. And then, here's the punchline, we're going to close the feedback loop with doctors, nurses, and pharmacists, and we're going to do it on a daily basis. And that, if we could perpetuate the incident command culture, that is, listen to the people who are on the front lines, it's a tenet of quality improvement, close the feedback loop, give doctors good information about what they could do better, and then get out of their way. That's what Google and WhatsApp were doing on a global scale, but at every hospital they had a little taste of that in the incident command culture. And we demonstrated that we could do it. We could make changes. We could create guidelines. Yes, we drove a lot of people crazy because science is messy.
It is.
Disease was messy. The virus didn't follow anybody's instructions, right?
Well, and to be clear, we didn't understand it.
We didn't understand it, and it was life-threatening.
Right.
And look, after the Second World War, a lot of historians coined the phrase, maybe you've heard it, Nick, when the dying stops, the forgetting begins. Right? And I hope that we don't get to that stage. And one of the reasons that Charles and I wrote this book was to tackle the idea that when the dying stops, the forgetting begins. I'm not going to let that happen.
No.
And I think we all, especially doctors, nurses, pharmacists, especially people who are on the front lines, not me, but people like my daughter, they deserve to not be forgotten.
Right.
And what we went through. And then, what are the implications for our great country? Just look around where we are today at ViVE. It's super exciting. We're the biggest business in America, right? Healthcare, we're 20% of the GDP. Nobody even comes close. The entire military-industrial complex is roughly 6 to 8%. We're 3 times that size. So we have an obligation, I think, to look in the mirror, see how we could do a better job. That's the thesis of how COVID crashed the system in a nutshell.
So, thinking back to some of the positives, so, move past the black garbage bags and, the shortages.
Scary.
It was, and, it's certainly been the topic of a few conversations I've had subsequently. I think we remember certain specific things, like, as you described, the sort of protection of, there was armed guards around PPEs,
Right.
there was even
Unbelievable.
almost raids, I think, by
That's
governments
right, that's
on
right.
testing
Well,
equipment.
there were instances of National Guardsmen from opposing states facing each other at the airport. I mean, like the Civil War kind of insanity.
To receive supplies.
To receive supplies, right?
Medical supplies, to be clear.
Remember Governor Cuomo, right? He was a superstar every
Yep.
day on television, as opposed to other leaders on television, right? Let's not forget.
Yes. So we learned a tremendous amount. I mean, I think, again, one of the silver linings that I would say about this was the incredible acceleration of science, our capacity in under 12 months, start to finish, from the point of identification to the point of a release of a viable, that's just unfair.
Effective.
A phenomenally
Phenomenal.
effective
Right.
vaccine.
And let's give credit to two relatively obscure scientists working at the University of Pennsylvania, our arch rival at Jefferson, who
That's very generous of you.
had been told multiple times that they'd never get anywhere with that work, and that mRNA
Right.
research was
20 years, I think.
was a road with no end, and hopefully both of them are going to get the Nobel Prize one
Yes.
day. Let's hope so, right?
I agree.
They have deep Philadelphia roots, an amazing team, a guy and a gal. They had 20 years of work,
Right.
Which, had we not had that, likelihood would be you and I would not be sitting here today having this conversation.
And I think to amplify that point, it's about the basic science that we don't always know is going to work out.
That's right.
That is essential to the foundation of building all of those blocks that we managed.
Another reason why you and I agree, science is messy. You don't know what's going to succeed and what's not. And the original clinical trials on both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines were a home run, far better than they had ever expected. Right.
Yeah. So I'm just going to say, from my perspective, a little bit of a downside to that was that it changed people's expectations and understandings of vaccines to, that's what I expect from a vaccine, which wasn't the normal.
Right.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. David Nash. He is the founding Dean Emeritus for the Jefferson College of Population Health. We're just talking about his book, How COVID Crashed the System. Some of the positives that we saw and experienced, I think. Let's talk a little bit about the negatives and, some of the failures. I think the surprise.
There are a lot of failures, Nick.
Oh, there was, to be clear, and, a million of them just in this country plus that we could talk about. But when you think about some of the things that we learned, we were a little bit slow in some instances.
Sure.
To share or even understand some basic things.
Sure.
Airborne. Proning in intensive care. And
Dexamethasone.
Then, I was going to say steroids, which I'm going to say as an old guy from medicine.
You and me both.
Wasn't that the most obvious thing?
Maybe not. Right.
No?
So look, let's also remember, imagine if you were an intern or a resident at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, Ground Zero, right? And you're an orthopedist in training or a psychiatrist in training, and now you're intubating patients one after another. They're dying in front of you. You're risking your life. We forget the intensity of it. And look, let's be straight for our listeners. The fact that it was in a hospital that served poor people of color, a good part of the country said, well, I'm going to look the other way. Let me tell you a story, Nick. I've been... Since the book came out right after Labor Day of 22, it's a good, fantastic opportunity. No one ever thought it would be a bestseller. All the money is going to Jefferson. We're selling 1,000 copies a month. I've been all over the country, back and forth. And I have had incredible stories of people coming up to me at a book signing, sharing what they went through. And to your point, I've had other stories of people in my face.
Oh, I bet.
For example, don't you think those million people would have died anyway? Come on. And this is with highly educated individuals, right? So I've also
with
had
letters after their names.
Unbelievable. And then I've been in environments where, the fancy dinner's over, and I've signed books, and most of the wait staff who are minority come up and give me a huge hug.
Yep.
So I've had both those experiences. And
You
everything
mean those essential staff that we didn't know were essential staff?
Right.
Right.
Who died at huge disproportionate levels in our own great city. The people who kept the trains running and the subways so the nurses and doctors could get to Jefferson, they were dying at 3x, 4x, and 5x the general population. So if we forget that, shame on us.
Truly no laughing matter. So let's talk about the future. So we've had our pandemic for this century. We won't be having another one for another century.
Well, let's hope you're right.
I joke, but I'm not.
Let's hope you're right.
Let's be clear. Even if we don't have one as bad, we're certainly going to see more of this. It's absolutely inevitable. I
think
that.
Most of the best scientists in the country would agree with you. Personally speaking, I was very happily surprised that during the great Chinese holiday migration back in January, I was petrified
that
a mutation would emerge when 800 million people decide to go on vacation. So far, in an unvaccinated country. So far, so good. I hope I don't have to eat my words one day. But right.
So we're going to see something, and yet, to your point earlier on of once the fighting's over, we start forgetting. We are forgetting.
Of course we are.
Why?
Right. So part
what
of it,
is wrong.
I know.
I'm sorry. Can I just reaffirm we're still in the U.S.? We haven't moved again?
Right.
Okay.
So I'll tell you what we learned in our work and, being absorbed in this every day for months on end. And Charles and I had a 90-minute Zoom call every other week for 18 months to make this work. So, we talked a lot about COVID. So I think when you interview the experts, the philosophers, the sociologists, the anthropologists, all of which we did, a couple of amazing things emerged. So in countries where they had trust in the government, just let that hang in the air for a moment, right? Where there was
which country was this?
Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Germany, Sweden, Norway, where they had trust in the government. That was the key characteristic. And the second characteristic was what the Aussies call mateship, M-A-T-E, mateship. You're my mate. And
it's truth. Yeah, I'll get that.
Right. And what happens to you, I care about.
Happens to me.
And happens to me. So between trust and mateship, those countries, they figured it out. They did the tough decision making. They did the quarantine. They wore the mask. They did all the things. Look, trust and mateship, that does not describe our country. It doesn't, sadly, right? And so I think that conquered everything. Culture eats the science for breakfast. And I think we saw an awful lot of that going on. That's the other thing we wanted to call attention to. And then look at our own industry, right? Billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars pumped into healthcare for good reason, keep the thing afloat. Here we are at ViVE, but lifespan in the United States is in reverse gear.
Yeah.
Right? Despite all the amazing technology you see surrounding us right here at this moment.
For the last 2 years.
The last 2 years, and the four horses of the emotional apocalypse, right? Alcoholism, suicide, opioid abuse, and depression. Pre-COVID, we're driving life expectancy in the reverse direction. Now you add isolation, domestic abuse, violence, lack of education, a whole generation of children trying to play catch-up ball, including my own grandchildren. Come on. So these are the forces that we have to contend with today.
So all compounded by that particular pandemic.
Absolutely.
No
Absolutely.
So, look, you're an expert. Let's be frank. This is your area of expertise in terms of management and dealing with population health. You set up the original training institution.
Yes, first school of its kind in the country. Right.
What does David do?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, Nick. So
there's no waving of magic wands.
No, there's no waving of magic wand. Look, I'm on the other side of the work mountain now, 33 years on the faculty and still counting. My goal is to get to 35 years of service. No single person is going to change the system, but if this book stimulates conversation for the current leaders to start to think differently and achieve what others have called the true north for our industry, which is, of course, improving health, right? That's our true north.
Right.
And sadly, we've lost sight of the core goal to improve health. It's not about health care delivery, it's about improving health for the population. We like to say, for the last decade in our college, we want to go upstream and shut off the faucet instead of what we do every day in healthcare, mopping up the floor, right? And I'm tired of mopping up the floor. That's a very expensive, ineffective, not safe way to run 20% of the GDP of the biggest economic engine in the world. So are we going to wake up and do things differently? Essentially, that's what the last couple of years of my career is going to be focused on.
So you're going to create the new WellCare system that we can all
I'm
sign
not going
up
to
for.
create it. I'm going to pester the people in charge to start thinking more broadly about the issues.
So where would you start? Who would you start pestering?
Well, let's do it right at home. Our great city of Philadelphia, it's been my professional home for 42 years, birthplace of our country, 5 medical schools, 1 out of 4 doctors passes through Philadelphia at some point in her training in America.
You win the occasional football game or
yes,
something. don't you?
occasionally
Yeah,
too,
okay.
right. Oh, yes, the Eagles. It was a disappointment. You had to bring that up. But seriously,
Well, I know
healthcare
about
is
it.
the biggest business.
I wasn't talking about that football. Anyway,
Right.
go on.
Healthcare is the biggest business in Philadelphia too, right? And if you took Sidney Kimmel Medical College, Jefferson Medical School, and Drexel, those are the 2 largest private medical schools in America. And yet, our county, where these schools are located, is the least healthy county in the state of Pennsylvania. Let me make sure everybody gets that, right? So how can we claim that we're improving health? I mean, the sad truth is we got a lot of work to do. And in my closing years, and it's great to be Medicare eligible, you know, I want to continue.
Is it though?
Yes, sure it is. Sure it is. And great to have a, 40-year perspective on the problem. But it's not going to be you and me, Nick. It's going to be my doctor daughter and her peer group who are going to be saddled with making the changes that we